Good morning, everybody. As Jeff said, my name's Hamish Treleaven, and I'm the Executive General Manager of Portfolio and Market Risk Management at the Commonwealth Bank. Look, I'm delighted to be here this morning. I'm a passionate believer in the benefits of STEM education and statistics education within that, and that's whether those benefits accrue to individual graduates in terms of, really rewarding and exciting careers, or whether the benefits accrue more broadly to industry, commerce, or the economy as a whole, because those skill sets, as we have already heard this morning, are in very high demand, and they very much drive the innovation and change agenda. So Nicholas, thank you very much for the invite to come along and talk to you this morning. Now, I've got to just clear at the outset, I'm not a statistician. I didn't put my hand up for that question earlier on this morning. I'm academically trained as a chemical engineer. And as Jeff said, I have been a banker for coming up to nearly 30 years. At the Commonwealth Bank, I've got a very highly quantitatively trained team. So I have a range of bankers who have master's or PhD degrees in disciplines such as astrophysics, physics, applied finance, actuarial studies, mathematics, and of course statistics. And these people are responsible for developing the models that we use to estimate the degree of risk in the various products that we provide to our customers. So that might be the credit risk inherent in a home loan or a credit card or a business loan or even a derivative contract. It might be the risk in our trading and global markets business. It might be the funding and liquidity risk in our group treasury, or the operational risk inherent across our entire business. I also have reporting to me the group's Chief Data Officer, and that role is a relatively new role across the broader financial services industry. So given all of that, I thought I'd talk about three things today. Firstly, the emergence of the role of the Chief Data Scientist, or data scientists more broadly. The emergence of the role of the Chief Data Officer, or data officers more broadly, and obviously those two categories can readily be filled by people with statistics qualifications. And then I thought I'd finish up with some keys to success in the commercial world for people who are trained as statisticians. So, let's start with the role of the Chief Data Scientist. Now, we read in newspapers and business journals every week that we are in the age of big data and data analytics. A gentleman by the name of Klaus Schwab, who is the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum. Now, that's the body that's most well known for the retreat that they hold early each year in the Swiss town called Davos. Now, Klaus Schwab's been running that organisation for the past 40 years, and recently he's published a book that posits that we are in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. We're surrounded by digital innovation, we're surrounded by mobile devices and data. Really significant developments are occurring across robotics and artificial intelligence. Data and analytics-driven innovation is occurring across the financial services industry in many places, and it's happening at rapid pace. Indeed, some research even claims that upwards of 30% of the jobs in the financial services industry that exist today won't exist in a decade's time and will have been replaced by jobs requiring a significantly greater analytical capability, and obviously that includes statistical capability. The World Economic Forum last year put out a really extensive research report that outlined the main areas in the financial services industry likely to be impacted by this data and analytics-driven digital innovation/revolution. So I guess, what does this all mean in actual practice? Well, the driving factor behind this is financial institutions' desire to improve their customers' experience. And so that might be making it easier for customers to access certain products, or easier for customers to assess whether a product meets their financial need, or it might be about making it faster for a financial institution to make a decision as to whether they should provide a certain product, i.e. a home loan, to a customer. So it's all about the ease of interaction and the speed of making decisions. Now, financial institutions have long taken an analytical approach to risk assessment for loans, liquidity, for market risk, for operational risk. And so this is where we seek to model the likelihood that loans will default over certain periods of time, or we seek to model the likelihood that at-call deposits will remain on deposit for extended periods of time so that we can use those deposits to fund the loans, or where we seek to model the likelihood of operational incidents or incidences of fraud, or we seek to model the likelihood that the Australian dollar might trade up or down inside a certain range over a certain period of time. Now, all of that modelling is grounded in statistics. Similarly, the models that we use to improve customer experience are all about seeking to estimate future behaviour and future needs, and they're also grounded in statistics. Now, that could be across needs around savings products, needs around home loans, needs around insurance products, needs around superannuation products. So notice that is across an individual's entire lifetime and therefore their lifetime interaction with a financial institution. And so lifetime data collection and lifetime data analytics is a really important part of this. And so an example of recent developments of this type is the advent of robo-advice. Now, this significantly increased use of data and data analytics has driven a requirement for even greater computing power. Now, it's not so much that the calculations that we're doing here are complicated, but it's more that there are many millions of them that are done, because some of them are Monte Carlo simulation based, and there are many millions of customers who might want to prevail on them. Although having said that, there can be a significant degree of computational complexity in determining the credit risk and the funding risk in a derivative transaction or a portfolio of derivative transactions, as shown by the bottom right-hand side of the slide. Now, some in the room may have read or heard of the quantum computing laboratory at UNSW and the world-leading research that they are doing into this concept of multi-state qubit computing. So that is sort of super-fast computing to the layperson, or arguably super-fast computing. Now, an area where this super-fast computing need is definitely going to be required in the future is in the area of blockchain distributed ledgers. Now, the blockchain process has the potential to quite substantially increase the speed and lower the cost of financial transfers across many asset classes. And where super-fast computing comes into play is blockchain ledgers are established in such a way as to reward the fastest agent that can verify transactions in the blockchain, and that therefore drives a requirement for super-fast computing capability. Another area of very significant analytical uplift and computing capability requirement is in the area of cybersecurity. So we're in the area of age of big data. We are collecting and storing lots of data. We're often transferring it, sometimes around the world. And so cybersecurity becomes an ever-present threat. And it needs ever-present vigilance. This is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 52-week-a-year threat. Now, the vigilance is delivered by a set of controls that are both preventative and detective, and the detective controls that banks typically run around cybersecurity are deeply analytical and statistical based. So out of all of this use for data and data analytics to drive improved customer experience and improved business outcomes, has emerged the role of the data scientist. And obviously, data scientists can readily be statisticians. Now, there's very significant demand for statistically trained and capable people, as we've spoken about earlier today, because this demand is not restricted to just the financial services industry. It's present across many other sectors, with the health, the retail, the mining sectors being examples of just a few. So that brings me to the second topic that I wanted to discuss today, and that is the emergence of the role of the Chief Data Officer. Now, financial institutions are investing heavily to improve customer experience through digitisation and automation. So if you read the published strategies of financial firms, they will list digitisation as a strategic objective almost every time. Now, how they go about managing their data is a key enabling building block in terms of allowing them meet that objective. Now, you'd all be familiar with the modelling truism of rubbish in, rubbish out, sometimes described in somewhat cruder terms, which I'm not going to use this morning. So financial institutions, from starting maybe 5 years ago for early adopters to 2 years ago for many others, have been taking their lead from companies such as Amazon or Google, and they have been establishing the role of Chief Data Officer. So what does the Chief Data Officer do? Well, that person is responsible for developing data management strategies, developing operating frameworks of how you manage your data that get to constructs of who owns the data, what's the definition of the data, what's the quality standard for the data, what's the security protocol for that data, where's it stored, once you no longer need that data, what's the protocol for destroying it. Now, additionally, in the financial services industry, we have some regulatory requirements around risk data aggregation, data privacy, and data retention, etc. Now, all of this sounds pretty straightforward. The idea that you should have agreed definitions for your data, agreed storage areas, an agreed owner, and an agreed quality tolerance. But not all organisations do this well. Many companies, many financial institutions are made up of legacy systems internally, and they need to be re-engineered or re-architected to be fit for purpose for the digital age. And practices around how organisations manage their data is one such thing that needs re-engineering. So a couple of examples. Think of the word exposure. Now, exposure is used frequently in the banking industry. But what do you mean by exposure? Is it the current drawn loan balance, or is it that plus the approved limit that includes an undrawn component? Does it include interest or not? What about the exposure on a loan when it defaults? And then what about the exposure in a derivatives contract where the value of that contract will change every day as underlying interest rates, FX rates, or commodity prices change? A simple example of a really costly mistake of not getting your definitions around data right occurred back in 1999. Now, NASA would employ some of the smartest analytical minds in the US, and yet they forgot to transfer imperial units to metric units, so that would be feet and pounds, to kilograms and metres, and as a consequence their Mars communication module crash landed, wasting $125 million. So a pretty expensive mistake. In the financial services industry, we're required to provide a certain amount of data to regulatory agencies, and so that would be the banking regulator APRA and the Reserve Bank. And we were quite heavily criticised at the end of last year because the industry reclassified home loans as to whether their purpose was for owner, occupier or investor purposes. And that classification split is something that both of those agencies use in determining the strength of the housing market, and that has implications around their financial oversight task. So, it's then not surprising to learn that a Harvard Business Review study of 2014 found that companies with a culture of quality spend on average $350 million a year less fixing mistakes, and part of those mistakes is mistakes associated with poorly managed data, and that tracks back to my original comment around rubbish in, rubbish out. So all of this sounds quite straightforward, but many companies don't do these things well and are needing to re-architect the way they do them to be fit for purpose for the new digital age. So that brings me to the last of my 3 topics of conversation today. And I think this is the most important of the 3, and that is, what is the keys to success for people with statistical qualifications or mathematical STEM type qualifications more broadly, so success in the commercial world. Now, I believe those to be the combination of 2 things, and that is effective communication and commercial acumen. So it's critical that those with analytical skills can explain complex issues in really simple terms. Communication needs to be clear and concise. You need to leave your audience in no uncertain terms as to what's in it for them. Now, in particular with senior executives, now these people are typically pretty smart. They generally understand well-explained concepts very quickly. They're time poor, and so you need to get to your point quickly. Companies often have guidelines on how to go about communicating, and they spend a lot of money training their staff to be better at this really crucial issue. And so guidelines can be on things such as how long papers are to senior executives or to executive management committees or boards, the fact that you don't use acronyms, you don't use technical jargon, you don't put equations in paper, and you never put computer code in a paper to a senior executive. So the point here is there's no point being the best and the brightest and the most capable statistician in the company if you can't communicate your ideas to lay people. And doing this well is actually really difficult to master. And my thought would be that this is something that you should start really early. You should start it at university rather than waiting until you're 5 years into your first job. Interestingly, the Australian Institute of Company Directors run courses on how to write papers to boards, and they can also be used as guidance on how to write papers to senior executive committees, and they would only be doing that if there was generally recognised need for improvement in that area. As an example of communication on analytical matters, you can Google Adam Spencer's TED Talk on his love of prime numbers, and you can compare that with any other TED Talk on a technical topic, and it'll become pretty clear good versus poor communication. Now, I've got to admit that it's a pretty unfair comparison because Adam Spencer's a gifted communicator. He's a champion debater from university days. He's a stand-up comic. He's a radio DJ, and he's a television presenter. So he's pretty good at that type of stuff. But I think you understand the point that I'm making. And so that then brings me to commercial acumen to finish with. Now, it's essential for career success for a statistician that he or she deeply understands the industry in which they are operating. And so they need to understand the economics of that particular industry. So what products you produce, who your customers are, why they buy them, what's the cost of production, what's your margin, how could the margin be eroded, who are your competitors, what are your competitors doing, are there any external factors that influence your industry, such as the exchange rate or interest rates or energy prices? What about the regulatory environment that you're operating in? What about the regulatory environment that your competitors are operating in? That may be different because they may be located overseas. So again, there's no point in being the best and the brightest and the most capable statistician in the company if you don't deeply understand the industry in which you are operating. And so if I could just once again revert back to the World Economic Forum research report into the impact of this digital revolution on the financial services industry that I mentioned at the beginning, that had 3 major conclusions, and the third of which was, how can financial institutions attract and nurture the right talent for the challenges of tomorrow? And the point being that that talent is STEM educated or statistics educated and capable employees. So in conclusion, I very much support the need for increased skills in the general area of STEM education and then specifically statistics education within that. Look, I think that these skills, along with good data management practices, along with commercial acumen, along with effective communication, will lead to very rewarding and successful careers for graduates. And they are and they will continue to be really important for helping Australian companies provide improved customer experience, improved financial performance through the use of big data and data analytics, and be active participants in the digital revolution or the 4th industrial revolution that is happening around us. So thank you very much.